Okay, so we're now live. Good evening, welcome everyone. My name's Catherine Jordan, and this is the next episode in our conversations on community resilience in changing times. This is week 7, and the topic this evening is reimagining food. Really glad to have you two wonderful ladies brave enough to embark on this conversation with us this evening. So welcome, Cathy and Wendy, to this conversation.
Pleasure.
Nice to have you both. So I'll just read a little bit to just introduce the topic, and then I'll say a little bit more about our speakers on this week's conversation. So, reimagining food. During the pandemic, we've seen the vulnerability of our food supply and how quickly the systems we depend upon can start to break down. Nearly all of us rely solely on what we can purchase in our local supermarkets. And yet during this time, we've frequently seen our supermarket supply being challenged. In my locality here in the UK, it's become quite normal to see our supermarkets having at least a quarter to a third of the shelves empty. But are we yet considering what's behind this, or what could be to come? And how might we be able to respond to this resiliently now? For some of us, this recent experience has left us questioning how sustainable our food supply is, and how much of our produce is coming from around the globe, often arriving in poor quality. Can there be a better way? And is this an opportunity to look at how we can do this? Could we engage in a way that enables us to have better quality of food that's more locally sourced, sustainable, and nourishes our earth, our animals, and our insects? As climate breakdown continues, food security is a growing concern. Today, we're not aiming to induce panic, but just to open up this dialogue, this important conversation on how we can look at this together, and how we can look at this with the perspective of not looking at just our own survival, but the survival of our communities as a whole. Today, I'm delighted to have this conversation with two very brave women, I think, to embark on this conversation. Who've agreed to dive deep with me on this topic and share our collective resilient considerations on how we can reimagine our food. So, with that said, I will just introduce our speakers a little bit today. So, first of all, we have Wendy FREEMAN. Hello, Wendy. Welcome on the call. So,
Hi.
Wendy is acting locally. Permaculture designer, learning my neighbours' timeworn methods, sorry, I apologise, of food production, sorry. Globally, a volunteer for sustainability, degrowth, climate change, and social inequality activism. Sorry for the messy bits of how I said that, but hopefully overall it came through. So welcome, Wendy. And we also have Cathy Hilton. Hello, Cathy. Welcome. Cathy teaches on how to harness the opportunities of loss to create profound fulfilment. She also has a passion for looking at resilient ways to engage with food. Welcome to the call, Cathy. Thanks for being part of this. So, David, if you're there with us, if you could just say a little bit about what you'll be doing this evening, that'd be great.
Hello, I'm David. I'm just here in the background to link up the event as it happens in 2 different places. So Catherine and her panel are recording this event live, and which appears with a very short time delay of a few seconds on Facebook Live. Now, what we really like to encourage is for people who are on the Facebook event watching to feel like they're not just watching, but able to participate if they'd like to. So there's a comments box, and we would love it if you could put in any comments, any questions, any appreciations about the matters that we're discussing. And feel free to really talk about how you're feeling about the issues. And we are aware that this is a very difficult issue for some people to deal with, the prospects that we might be facing over the coming months and years. So there's no need to be too shall we say, tiptoe through the tulips. You can really say it how it is if you really want to. And if there is anything you're thinking, oh, I can't really post that, that's probably the thing we really want to hear. So feel free to really jump in and participate. It would be wonderful to hear from you. And then anything you say, I will pass on to Catherine, or I will put it to everybody directly myself. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, David. And yeah, we might have you back in for a bit of a conversation on this actually this week, David. I hope we do. That'll be good. So yeah, I'll just sort of hand over to each of you. Maybe Cathy, if you'd like to go first and just say a bit more about yourself and why you're speaking on this topic today. That'd be great.
Well, thank you. I came to this because January 2019, I had been running my own business. I was a designer. I was producing a housewares collection, which I loved, which I was very proud of. And I hit an absolute wall of, I'm working so hard to chase my tail, to try and afford housing, food, to try and make it in this Western culture. And I was exhausted. Christmas was my peak business time of the year. It was January, I was exhausted, and I thought, I'm fighting so hard to make this work, and this is part of the problem. Like, the business that I had, which I loved, which I was very proud of, was fundamentally part of the world's problem, because I was making very beautiful things that weren't necessary. And I came to feel it was unconscionable to carry on. And this was a terrifying prospect, because I would lose all my money that was in my business. I knew I was also likely losing my housing. I had to end the relationship I was in. And I went to, I was clear I wanted to change my life so that I was part of the solution rather than part of the problem. And I looked for a new career and looked for retraining and couldn't really find anything that fitted what I was passionate about, and I couldn't afford retraining. So I spent 2 years educating myself online, really. I've just spent 2 years reading and reading and reading and looking at how we might regenerate society. And it's so possible. It is so possible. And although COVID has obviously been enormously tough in so many ways, it has stopped us. It stopped us in our tracks, and it's given us this opportunity to change everything. And with collapse comes opportunity. So I am excited about the situation we're in. I appreciate our current circumstances look really bad, but actually it's like winter, you know, it's like winter, and the shoots are in the ground. They're starting to push up. There's so many initiatives in Britain. I've done research for the last 2 days, putting together a document for this talk, which will be available, I believe. There'll be links. I must have found 20 organisations, national organisations, that are addressing this problem with funding, with intelligence, with passion. There's a lot of grassroots initiatives happening. It's something that it's something that the government at a really fundamental level is addressing, in a way that we often dismiss government, but government has really understood the breadth of the issue right now, and they're really having a go at a sustainable solution. I think that's all I'll say for now, but that is my answer to what brings me here.
That's really great. And it's really great to know that. It's really great. I'm very grateful for the work you've done producing this document. So yeah, thank you for doing that. And it's really good to hear that our government is thinking about this. I'm impressed. I'm very pleased to hear that. It's good. It means it's transparent on some level, which I wasn't aware it was.
Yeah.
So I'm encouraged by that. That's great.
Good.
So just to mention the document that Cathy has lovingly produced, looking at all these different resilient projects that are happening. If you are on our Facebook event, it will be in the comments, the first comment. So David is posting it there for us. If you're watching this back on YouTube, it will be on the item description. or if you're listening on the podcast, we'll also link it on there. So anybody who's watching or listening to this can access that document and get those resources. So thanks, Cathy, for taking the time to do that. Yeah, really great document. Really recommend going through it. So Wendy, yes, would love to hear a bit more from you, Wendy.
I resonate with so much that you say, Cathy. I think it happened quite a long time ago for me. I ran into a brick wall at one stage living in London of, I was married at the time, and my husband was in a sort of work position where he wanted to buy a really big house in London, and we would have committed to a mortgage that probably would have taken us into our retirement. And it's a similar thing to you. I sort of stepped back and realized that if he and I were not married anymore, and I probably changed my job, then I would lose a lot of the nice things that I had and the relationship. But that was the route that I had to go. I mean, it was untenable. People use that word, but I kind of know what it means now. And I was very lucky. I went to India on a tourist trip and to do a yoga course, and I ended up living in India for 4 years. Just things happened, and I volunteered at an organization. And I lived an incredibly different life. I lived in the south, where it's very, very warm. It's tropical. So we just had cold water. We had, there's all sorts of things. Like, Indians generally don't use loo paper. It was something you had to specially order from the local specialist supermarket. And when you first arrive, it's like, oh my God, how will I survive without toilet paper? But I had that wonderful privilege of living that other life where these things are not the norm.
Yeah.
You know, air conditioning, hot water, toilet paper, so many things we take for granted that we can't survive without, and very different food. So in Kerala, in the south where I lived, they are vegetarian across the population. I mean, there are meat eaters, but generally meat is not a thing. And the food is fantastic, and my health was brilliant. And I just realized that lots of things I presumed, I mean, one thing I could have killed for was pesto. But pesto is such a product. It's a factory product. I mean, I know one or two chef type friends that make their own pesto, but it's a huge palaver to get all the various bits and pieces. So there was this huge transformation for me in terms of what we can happily survive on. And I use the word happily on purpose, because I think that's the real scary thing for most people when you talk about resilience. People envisage, or the media sells to them, this picture of living in a cave with your children in rags, everyone gnawing on a bone, you know, of some dinosaur or something. And I don't think that's what resilience is at all.
Yeah.
So like Cathy, I went on the internet. I did a huge amount of reading and learning. I was lucky enough to get on a permaculture training course for a couple of months as a volunteer. And I've left London. The background that you can see behind me is a little stone farmhouse that I'm slowly redoing in Portugal. I know this is not everyone's option of resilience. I've given up quite a lot to be here, but it's still a privilege to have a bit of land. But my intention here is to do the work myself and grow my own food as much as possible. And I have English neighbours and a lot of Portuguese neighbours, as you mentioned, Catherine, that have always grown their own food. We have olive trees here, citrus, a lot of orange trees. Everyone grows their own. I don't drink, but lots of people grow their own wine and stuff like that. And it's luck to be able to see and learn, you know, really take it on board by watching other people, that we don't need all the things that we see in the supermarket. So yeah. I've been through a life process of actually experiencing lack. I haven't starved by any means. I mean, I'm not saying that at all, but just having that wonderful shift. And that's something that I think, like Cathy as well, I'm trying to teach that. So I have a permaculture demonstration site, if you can call it that. And in normal times when there isn't lockdown, I would have volunteers living here with me. So I don't run training courses, but we grow food. And yeah, I talk a lot about it on social media, how easy it is. And I'm learning all the time from almost everyone who comes to visit me and from all my neighbors. And wow, there's so many resources online. There really are. So yeah, that's where I am. And that's why I'm here. Great.
And where do you share your, you said you share a lot online. Where do you share mainly if people want to follow that on?
I'm in a couple of permaculture groups on Facebook and the Permi Forum and things like that, and the Research Network for Permaculture UK. And actually, I tend to help other people with editing documents and stuff like that. I'm not so much writing my own stuff. I feel like I'm still learning. I mean, I've been doing this for about 10 years. But there's people that have been doing permaculture and growing food in tiny little allotments and stuff like that in London for 30 and 40 years. And there's just always so much to learn. So yeah, more maybe the kind of thing that Cathy did with that document is there's so many rich resources to try and put them in one place. The people who are new to it can easily find the stuff that I've been digging for years and years, you know, my stash of resources, just sharing those.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thanks, Wendy. Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing more from both of you already. It's very interesting. I love the thing I love about this is, as David called it last week, these are like pop-up communities each week, and we bring together, you know, we come together on a topic, but I love the richness of where everyone's coming from and the different perspectives. So I'm already feeling a richness in what you've both already shared. So I wonder if we can start with a question that we start with each week. If I ask Cathy first, how are you living resiliently at this time? So in this time of a pandemic, we're still in a lockdown in the UK.
Yeah.
What's community resilience looking like for you in your life right now?
Well, when I faced what I faced, realized what I realized, my conclusion was the most valuable use of me is to, given the skills that I have, which include intelligence, if I might say so, the best use of me is to look at how we might shift society as a whole. Why are we, given all that we know about the ecological crisis, why are we failing? So I decided that was a big job, but I was going to take it on. And I needed a living situation that meant I could thoroughly give myself to that. Nobody was going to pay me to do that. Nobody was going to pay me to do that. I wasn't going to get funding. So I looked for a skill swap, effectively. I looked for a situation where I could give something easily and in return have food and housing security. So I've basically gone back to being an au pair, which I was as a teenager. And I'm currently, with the schools being closed, I'm doing 2 days a week homeschooling, looking after a 5-year-old and a 1-year-old. And in exchange for that, I'm living on their land very happily. You see behind me, I'm in a shepherd's hut. I love it. It's beautiful. And we have a very flexible arrangement. So I do more hours. The parents are both working full-time, so I do more hours when appropriate, and I get to go to Devon, which was originally my home, which it wasn't originally my home, but it feels like my home. I get to go to Devon for several weeks at a time when there's less need for me here. So my living resiliently was very much thinking outside the box. I wasn't somebody who had any abilities at all growing food. I didn't have any financial resources, but I did have skills. So I looked at how I could swap those skills for essentials.
Yeah, smart thinking.
Thanks.
I like it.
It's working really well. It's working fabulously.
I mean, was this inspired, your recent move, was that inspired by the pandemic, or was it something you were already thinking about beforehand?
It was already underway. Excuse me. It was already underway, yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Yeah, because I knew I really wanted to address the ecological crisis, and I knew nobody was going to pay me to do that. So I needed to find a way to live that was almost expenses free. Yeah,
that makes sense. Good move, and it's working out well by the sound of it.
It is. It really is. Yeah. Yeah, we're having a lot of fun.
Great. That's great. And Wendy, I mean, you've said a little bit about, you know, moving to Portugal and learning to grow your own food. And I'm sure for anyone who's embarked on the journey of learning to grow your own food or permaculture, it's always a learning experience. I think that's definitely been my experience. It's a constant learning, as life is. But yeah, I just wonder if you could say a bit just on that topic about how you feel you're living resilient on a day-to-day basis in your life right now.
I love this phrase that comes from Helen Norberg Hodges, where she talks about acting locally, but thinking globally. And I think as I've progressed along my resiliency, yeah, it's not an easy word, journey, that's become more and more how I evaluate what I'm going to do next and things that I'm actually already doing. So I try to grow a bit of my own food. I'm still using, there are local farmers markets, and that kind of feels like a resilient way of getting food while I have financial resources. So I buy food from people that produce too much and need the money to pay taxes and pay their electricity bills and things like that. So it's a kind of it's money, but it's an exchange, and it works in the local environment. I need my Portuguese neighbours to still be here and not to have to go off to work, because they are maintaining big farms and land around me. And I feel like going forward, we all need to be very conscious of supporting farmers. There's so many of them, not depressed and not making enough money to keep their families and their children in school and stuff like that. So that's kind of on my mind as well. I'm trying to be more and more resilient in what I need. So I lived with someone for quite a while that was on solar power, on a very limited solar installation. And I learned to do without a hairdryer. I learned to do without instant electricity for just about everything you can think of. I had to charge my devices during the day because there just wasn't power for it at night. So the internet stopped at a certain time. And again, these are things that you can't imagine until you start working with them. And I'm not saying to others, look at me by any means. I think what's always been my learning journey is to ask people to come and try it. And when I have volunteers living with me here, one of the things that we do is we eat really well. The food in Portugal is outstanding, but it's really simple food. And we go to the market and we buy whatever is for sale. And this is one of the huge issues in the UK. So I'm talking from a Portuguese perspective, but I lived in London for 20 years. And what you buy, bananas from Madeira and, coconuts from India and stuff like that, it's all come from somewhere else. And I think we all need to start getting our heads around what grows locally. It's great to have access to stuff that comes in from elsewhere, and equally, clothes that we wear and stuff we use in our houses. What can be gotten from the local environment? Obviously, you want to keep supporting some communities internationally that produce things that we need, but let's cut that absolute need for stuff that gets shipped from China and food that gets shipped. There's a story that I always, it speaks to where we are with our food system. And I learned about this in 2002. I'm South African. The UK, one of the supermarkets, and I won't mention any names because we don't want to cause trouble with the big players, but one of the supermarkets, and I'm sure they all did it, used to send English apples to South Africa by air freight to be polished with wax. And they got flown back to the UK and sold in supermarkets at a perfectly reasonable supermarket price, because labor in South Africa is so much cheaper than in the UK. So I probably don't need to go into it. I mean, I'm sure everyone on the call is thinking, let me do the maths on that. I mean, how is the maths even feasible? But when I heard that story, I really realized, and I know it's true because I know farming people in South Africa. So I just went, we have a major problem here and we need to shift.
Yeah, that's quite shocking to hear. It doesn't somehow surprise me because I know relatively other crazy stories that are very similar to that, but that is, it's mind-blowingly shocking, isn't it, to hear stuff like that. So yeah, so I'm wondering, I'm a bit more curious to know a bit more, Wendy, about what you just said about how community resilience is looking in your community, because outside of you're part of a community, I can hear that, and it sounds like you're part of a community that's also thinking resiliently. I just want to bringing it a bit more outside of your immediate home. What's happening in your community there? Like what are you all doing together?
So I'm pretty vocal and I'm quite visible on social media, and we started up things like a messaging group to meet up for drinks at a local cafe to support the local cafe, because it's the only one in our village. And there were very few people in there because it's quite a sparsely populated rural area. So all the foreigners who've bought here in Portugal, because land in Portugal and little properties like this one in Portugal are, I think, cheaper than anywhere else in Europe, except maybe in Eastern Europe. So there's quite a lot of us here. And we're all trying to learn Portuguese. So there's kind of these things that bring us together. And I shared with them what I'm doing. And so stuff came out of that. So one of the things we started about 3 years ago was a produce swap, because people grow what they love. So one guy is a real tomato specialist, and one guy, I'm a real pumpkin and butternut specialist. And I mean, I grow like 300 of them a year, which I can keep. I mean, now in lockdown, the swap has stopped. So I had like 100 butternuts. I ate butternut soup almost every night the whole winter. But we started swapping when people had too much stuff. And wow, that was such a rich, so we just made a rule, no money to change hands. The idea is you bring something that you have a lot of or that you're willing to swap. There's a woman making soap out of olive oil, and there are people growing the most outrageous things. I mean, I know loofah is a big thing, to be more sustainable and use loofah rather than using plastic sponges and cleaning yourself and cleaning dishes. There are people here that grow loofah, so they've been teaching us how to do it and swapping the seeds. We've all started growing our own loofah. So there's this wonderful growing community of knowledge and of support. And now with lockdown, it's that direct. We used to meet twice a month, but that's kind of stopped. So we do a little bit of it online. We started an online Facebook group that does that. But the conversation is ongoing. So people have made contacts with people who are teaching them to do stuff. So they talk, you know, when do I put my tomatoes in and stuff like that. Or people have fruit trees. I mean, one of the things with fruit trees is once they really get going, if they're in the right environment, they really get going. So citrus here and plums in particular, and of course olives. If the tree is happy and in a good location, you can't eat all the produce. There's no way. So I quite often get messages from people saying, please rescue me from a deluge of tangerines or a deluge of lemons or whatever, you know. And then you realize, and my neighbor, English neighbor, is an absolutely gifted cook, and he makes the best lemon butter in the world. And he probably could end up making money in his retirement selling the stuff. So everyone who's got extra lemons gets hold of him. He gives you a bottle back, a jar back, but he probably gets 10 or 15 jars himself. And you see how village industry must have developed in the old days.
Yeah.
Kind of gone back to that. And it's so rich. It's so lovely, you know, really. So, yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that's great. And it's so lovely to hear that those things are happening. You know, for me, it just feels like, oh, it's so lovely to hear that people are thinking like that. And people, it just, you know, we are intelligent beings. I do believe that. I do believe humans are innately intelligent. And it's nice to hear that that intelligence is actually being made use of in some ways. So, yeah, that's great. Cathy, I wonder, how's this looking where you live? I know you've not been where you are that long, as far as I understand, but
yeah,
I don't know if you've had a chance to connect with the wider community. No, you
absolutely
haven't.
not. No, I arrived during lockdown. I've been here maybe 3 or 4 months. I talked to somebody who MOT'd my car. That's been pretty much it. Yeah, so I'm just with the family here, and I have no interaction with the wider population at all.
No, that's fine. And is there any food growing happening?
Yeah, there is. Yeah, but relatively small scale. There's a vegetable garden. We have got 6 chickens who do their job. They're good producers, but we're not. The guys I'm living with are not of the same mindset. So they've got corporate jobs. They're doing very well in that field, and there's movement, but they're living in a different world. Yeah,
I get that. Yeah. So I know that you touched on something in the beginning, Cathy, that really resonated for me, which is an excitement at this moment of opportunity.
Yeah.
I don't know if we're feeling that in exactly the same way, but I feel drawn to ask you more about that. What is that for you? Yeah.
Well, you can look at it in different ways. You can look at it, the bigger picture is any moment of crisis is always the biggest moment of creativity, because all the rules fall away. And we can see, we were sleepwalking. Most of us were sleepwalking within our culture. I mean, Western culture has a lot to answer for. We developed a lot, we did very well, but we also were really screwing up. And we were sleepwalking. We just couldn't see it. And so there's the opportunity of having to change. There's the opportunity of crisis. And then there's the answers that I found in the research that I've done the last few days, which I can only answer really by looking through my document and telling you different things I found, if that's a suitable point in this conversation for me to
if you would like to do that. If you have
right, let me reopen my document.
Right.
The first organisation that I am now completely in love with is called food citizenship, and they make the point that we are completely, our mindset has been completely one of being a consumer. So we have boxed ourselves into the receiving position. So we have all these corporations doing an awful lot of work, and then we're the bottom receivers. And then we also have governments legislating. Excuse me, I haven't got COVID, but I have got a cough. So we have imagined that we have no agency. We have, I mean, you Catherine, I have some awareness of your circumstances. I know the town that you're living in. I know there's no real option for you to be growing food. And our mindsets are so commonly singular. We're trying to solve it for ourselves. And being single people or single households, we don't imagine there's anything we can do other than shop. And we may be trying to shop ethically, but that's where our mindset has been. This organization, Food Citizenship, are talking about when enough of us get together and appreciate that we have agency, then we are more powerful than the corporations. So that's it's a mindset shift. If that mindset changes, then everything else falls into place. Changing a mindset is only about education. It's only about having a conversation like this and a light bulb going off and thinking, okay, yeah, if I just find 20 people who care about the same thing, we can start something, we can do something. And then if you have 2,000 people, 20,000 people, which you can have very quickly, you can change the whole food system of a country. Really, you can. So food citizenship, they're on the case. Great news. Look at this document, find the link, go look for them. Then we have something called the National Food Strategy Organisation, which is an independent review. It's been commissioned by the government, but it's being undertaken by independent people. And they're looking to create a better food system for the nation. So it's government backed, and they're looking for fundamental change. And all the things that I know you, I presume anybody who cares about food resilience, all the things that you wish would be addressed are in their objectives. I've read their front page. Excellent, absolutely excellent. They've produced the first phase. They've produced a preliminary report, and they've interviewed 1,600 interested parties, and they're now producing phase 2 of their report. So fingers crossed on that one. Okay, then let's move on down my document. I've listed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 other national organisations that are addressing food resilience.
In the UK?
In the UK. Yeah. Plus a European organisation that has an €8 million budget. So they're clearly on the case for looking at systems change. Then I started looking at, so I like to get context. So obviously I can sort things out for myself, but I want society to be better. So there's no point in pursuing things that aren't going to work. There's no point in not learning from other people's mistakes. And there's no point in only solving things small scale. So I wanted really big information, and it is out there. Go look at this document, go read what other people are doing. There's an awful lot of expertise being shared. So I do think we have every potential to make a difference. I do think we're on the cusp of things changing. Then if you look at what might happen for oneself, each of us can either grow our own food, or we can get together with other people. Getting together with other people has to be a much better plan, because if you grow your own food, if you get sick, or if there's some weather crisis in your area, you haven't solved anything. I don't know if you know Charles Eisenstein's great book, Great Man, Great Book, The More Beautiful World Your Heart Knows Is Possible. Something I learned from him some years ago was become an indispensable member of your community. That's the most resilient thing you can do. If you're needed, then whatever crisis happens, people will try and keep you existing. So the most useful thing you can do, whatever your skills, really whatever your skills, if you're housebound, if you're depressed, you could become a friend, an online friend of other depressed people. Even if you feel hopeless and small, you have skills, and you can swap those skills to become a valuable member of your community. Even I know there'll be people listening saying, no, I have no skills, I am at a point in my life where I've got nothing to offer. That's absolutely never the case. It really isn't. And whatever you bring to the table, I was going to say whatever you bring to the table will be rewarded, and that's not true. So let me rephrase that. We have to solve this at a community level. You can't solve it for yourself and be really resilient. So we have to solve it at a community level. And one of the real issues for society is we've fractured our communities so badly, but everybody wants that to change. Everybody wants it to change. Everybody wants it to change. So we've each got to walk forward. We've each got to do our little incremental bits to improve our communities, and then it will grow. It'll be a cumulative result, and our communities will improve. So take your actions. I'm going to look at the different shapes of initiatives that are proving successful. So there's community farming, which can be many different shapes. Wendy was talking about one structure of community farming. There's also things like farmers handing over their land to people, saying, like, I'm exhausted, I'm not making it profitable, you guys provide the labor, grow your own food, just get on with it. There's crowd farming, where farmers advertise. There's a website called crowdfarming.com where farmers are listing their crops, and you can sponsor a tree, you can sponsor a bush, you can sponsor a field, and then get posted to you the crop, which is quite an extraordinary initiative. Other ways of community farming, people can get together and buy land, farm together. I've written quite a lot about different ways to there are very different shapes. Whether you've got money, whether you've got land, there are different ways you can do it, and there's several organizations backing this up. There's community-supported-agriculture.org.uk, there's the Funding Enlightened Agriculture Group, there's the Ecological Land Cooperative, which is looking to empower future farmers who have no land, so people who want to be farmers and can't afford land. They're obviously doing a great job. Excuse me. Then I also looked at, apart from sourcing our own food, feeding communities. And the best example I found is in Gloucestershire. It's called The Long Table. It's just an incredible organisation. Really go look at the website, because I tried to write a summary and I just couldn't. They're covering so many different avenues. They have larders of love. They make frozen meals. They put freezers all over Gloucestershire. Anybody can go and get a frozen meal. And what is different from, my dad is in my ear telling me I always get the grammar of that one wrong. Different from, so what they're doing that other regions aren't managing to do is they're feeding people highly nutritious food for free in crisis. So Torbay has the Torbay Food Alliance, which has which is getting national coverage. It's been extraordinarily successful. 12 different organisations like food banks and charities have come together in Torbay to respond to crisis. I think they've fed, it's certainly in the hundreds of thousands, the number of meals that they've provided in the last year. And I would say, I think I've heard Catherine say the same, it's not nutritious food. It's not highly nutritious food. It's a lot of highly processed food. What the Long Table is doing better than Torbay Food Alliance is they're managing to provide really highly nutritious food, well cooked meals from natural ingredients. So that is the great thing. There's also food purchasing cooperatives, which is where a group of people can get together to buy at wholesale prices. So you might buy staples like rice, pulses, vegetables, but you can buy them if you get together, like you can set up a food buying cooperative with your neighbours or with like-minded people locally, and then you can buy it regularly from wholesalers, and obviously you won't have overheads, so you don't need to sell on with a margin, so everybody gets things more cheaply. There's the idea of community-run shops. So people, I've listed guides for how to set up a community-run shop, and I've given a few examples of ones that are going really well. And actually in Devon, do you know, Catherine, in Brixham, Oats is transitioning as we speak to community ownership.
Oh, great. Okay. No, I didn't.
So then you will have local people willing to run the shop, willing to do all the labour of the shop to keep the prices down. This is obviously a very nice shift from being reliant on supermarkets. Yes.
Wendy,
And
yeah.
you mentioned there, Cathy, that's an example of a place where someone who feels that they can't grow food or do anything else could sit in a shop, you know, and offer a couple of hours a day or a couple of hours a week to run the shop, which I think a lot of people can do that maybe are not even mobile. You know, maybe if mobility is a problem, you could be there and run the till or whatever. Yeah. So
yeah, it's great.
Yeah, would they get some kind of food produce in exchange for their time? Yeah.
Well, there are so many different ways you can structure it. One of the things that the food citizenship organization is having us grasp is we can make this up.
Yeah.
The system's broken. We don't have to follow the rules anymore. Okay, maybe we have to follow some rules while it's in transition, but don't wait for government to sort it out. We can do this. We can do this. Let's get on with it. Great. Okay, let's go back to the list. Growing your own food. There's so much information about growing your own food. I'm not going to try and be the expert on that, but there are, you might not know, there are garden sharing schemes. There are websites that will put people with land that they're not using in touch with people who have the motivation to grow, which is a great connection to be made. That's something to look for. There's Good to Grow, uk.org, and there's Lendon10, excuse me, Lendon10.com. Other aspects of food resilience I have listed: preserving food, where we have, as a culture in England, all we really do is freeze or pickle. That's about it in terms of preserving food, make jam. But things like canning and dehydrating mean when you do, if you are growing, or if somehow you end up with a huge volume of some food, you can preserve them longer term. That's a skill really worth learning. Foraging is something so worth addressing, because the volume of food within nature is much greater than most of us have any sense of. Yeah. There's endless websites, books, videos to educate yourself on that one. Particular recommendation is the website eatweeds.co.uk. Some of the information needs to be local, because what's growing in your habitat will be different to other parts of the world. but also a lot of it overlaps. I've put in information for eating on a budget. Jack Monroe is particularly well known for her recipes for a meal for 30p. You know, feed a family of four for £1. She's an incredible advocate who is determined that food poverty, that poverty doesn't prevent people from getting her information. So she publishes most of her recipes for free, and she has books for people who also care about her and want to support her. It's worth looking at nutrition, because changing our diet from what most people will have become used to in terms of highly processed food, changing to more natural food, is something that shocks the body. And actually, for a lot of people, it's unpleasant at first. The food doesn't taste good. Think highly processed food sells well because it has addictive qualities to it. So when you give it up, there's a bit of a shock to the body. So it's worth transitioning, because A, you'll get a lot healthier, B, you'll have a pile more money, and C, if the world goes to pot, you'll need to be able to eat the food on your from your terrain, rather than be relying upon mass-produced food. So it's really worth starting that transition if you haven't already. Then this document, I've looked at other local resources to Devon, and I've written there's an interest in forming a Devon Sustainable Food Network, which is massively needed. Torbay Council's website has no information on food resilience at all. It has information on food poverty, which is basically go to a food bank, but it does not have anything at the moment addressing this crisis. And it took a lot of Googling, I have to say. It took a lot of delving before I found anybody taking any kind of an overview in Devon at all. And I found a report written to address the current situation. So let me check what I've said here. So a thing called Devon Sustainable Food Network doesn't exist yet, but there's interest in forming it. This report was written, and the conclusion was, yes, we should form it, because we've got hundreds of businesses and they're working disconnectedly. So we need to bring them together. There's obviously incredible intent and incredible expertise, and there's no coordination going on in Devon. So somebody should do something about that. I've moved to Lancashire, otherwise I might do something about it. I'd like to come back, maybe I will do something about it. I made the point, Torbay, so in that document they listed 100 businesses that had contributed to this report. Not one was in Torbay. So there's such a dearth of interest, such a dearth of paying attention to this issue in Torbay. There's no leadership. Contrast that with Exeter. Exeter has set up an organisation called Food Exeter, and they have a citywide strategy which includes growing, feeding people who can't afford to feed themselves with nutritious food, and all the things we have been addressing. That's most of my document.
In the UK, where's, I'm just wondering.
Say again?
Go on, I'll let you carry on, sorry.
Okay, my last
I was just
point.
wondering out of what you've seen in that side. Oh, no, it's slightly delayed.
You.
I was just wondering out of what you've seen so far. I know you
Yeah.
mentioned the project in Worcestershire. Was there anything else that was really standing out to you as a really great model of what can be done?
Well, I tell you what, the Sikh community. So within the Sikh community is the principle of, begins with L. Can anybody else tell me what it's called? Okay, we can't remember what it's called. but it is it is an act of service to feed other people. It's so Seva, S-E-V-A, is part of the religion where you serve. Preparing food and giving it for free is part of the religion. So the Sikh community have fed well, in crisis, they're used to feeding people. They're used to having catering kitchens and moving them to places of crisis. Do you know when there was great queues of lorry drivers stuck as Brexit was happening? It was the Sikh community. The Sikh community were arriving with vans full of hot meals and driving along these queues of lorries and just dishing out foods. So they have a very established system, and obviously that's culturally ingrained. We British, I'm saying British because I think that's going to be most of our audience right here. We British have developed into a much more selfish culture. As things stand, we're a very selfish culture. I feel we're transitioning. I feel that COVID has made us see how enormously reliant we actually are on each other, and it's making us think again about what our values have been. But it's interesting that my answer to your question, what other projects inspire me, needed to be not a British culture one.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah.
It doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah.
Wendy, I just want to check, is there anything you'd like to add at this point?
I think it's lovely that Cathy called out the Sikh community. One of the groups that I'm doing quite a lot of social media work with, because I'm based in Portugal, is and I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but the acronym BAME, so Black, Asian, Middle Eastern permaculture group that I'm part of, is very London based. And I'm not in that category. I mean, I'm an ally, and they face a lot of racism. So people who have allotments and then, face racist speaking when they go into the allotment. Someone, if I say British, but a white person, or someone, a racist person, not a white person. But one of the things that's happening with them is they're, two of the guys who run one of the groups that I'm in have family in India. So they've never been to India themselves, but they're Indian heritage. And they feel like growing food is in their blood. So they're having to learn to grow stuff on a soggy allotment in, somewhere in Tottenham or wherever their allotments are. It's a very new experience for them. I mean, they're not experienced farmers, but their community is a lot more supportive by the sounds of it. They take their children down to the allotment, or they take the children into the back garden, and the neighbors' kids come over, and all the kids are planting peas. And I've seen videos, where a whole bunch of children are learning these things. So it is a culture that we British, so a certain group of us, big group of us, have no experience of where our food comes from. There are horror stories, and I'm pretty sure it's true in the UK, but it's definitely true in the US, of children who go to the supermarket and never realize that stuff in a polystyrene with a plastic over is the same as that chicken walking around over there. It's got the same name, but they don't actually, and then they stop eating meat altogether because they're like, what the hell are you feeding me, They've got no concept until they one day go to a farm as a tourism thing of where their food comes from. So there's a huge problem in our culture of valuing food, good food, and as you said, with processed food, we supermarkets, Sainsbury's, I'm not going to name any supermarkets, sorry, Catherine. When you go into any supermarket, and it's absolutely true here in Portugal with French and all other supermarkets, as you go in, there's two huge long aisles, the full size of the supermarket. One is crisps and every form of that kind of snack, a whole aisle, nachos and whatever. They're big on them here in Portugal as well. And one is sodas. And then you go to the cooler area, and there's a whole aisle full of different types of tiny plastic containers with children's sweetened yogurt in, which I've looked at the nutrition on some of those, and it's not exactly nutritive food, but the mothers feel like they're being advertised to, that they feel like they're giving their child, dairy is good for you and there's vitamins, added vitamins, but they're half sugar. And it's like, wow, man, our culture is just so the thing of giving a kid an apple and a banana to take to school. I mean, a lot of the children, the very young children that I know from London, would probably know how to peel a banana because they've seen it on TV, but they want to know why it isn't sliced up and in yogurt or something. You know, they don't really want to eat it as a piece of fruit. So this distance between where food comes from and how good it is for us and actually growing it ourselves is a huge cultural thing, but something that you spoke to, Cathy, that really, I really felt it. You just need one person like yourself, not even growing food, but where you are thinking about it and worrying about it and talking about it to your household. For them to start shifting, and maybe this year they won't be suddenly changing their corporate jobs to growing fields of wheat, but something in them from your culture change is going to infect them. And I use the word infection in a pandemic with care. But that's what's definitely happened with me. I had friends in London, so when I was living in India, and Catherine, just interrupt me if I'm going the wrong direction, but
no, it's fine, go for it.
I popped back to visit them because I needed visas, because as a Brit, you can only be in India up to 6 months on a, this is the old days. I have no idea what it is now. Anyway, and I stayed with friends who had a house in London, beautiful house, in an area that has very good door-to-door recycling. So the council actually come and take your recycling away. And I know this is not food in particular, but this is just how shift works. And we had a big party for me being back in London among my friends and having not been there for 6 months. And a lot of wine was drunk. And in the morning when I was helping to clean up, I was like, you know, bottles of wine, empty bottles at this stage, where's the recycling? And there was much embarrassment because you can't not know about it, recycling it, you know, 10 years ago. But they kind of weren't doing that recycling. And I was like, how can you not? When I went outside and I just looked, and I mean, just these tiny London front yards. And the chap next door had about 4 containers. They're plastic crates, I think. And you just put the different stuff in the different crates, and the council comes and takes it away from you. And you have to go out your front door, but that's all you need to do. And if I think of how difficult recycling is in some places in the world, and I was outraged. I mean, I don't think I had a fight with them. I was just so in shock. I was like, you guys are friends of mine, but we're not talking the same language. How can you not be recycling glass at the very least? And we're talking about a family that drinks at least a bottle of wine a night. So there's quite a lot of glass to be recycled. Well, the next time I went back to visit them, not only did they have all 4, they knew where batteries went and where the little bottle caps went, and but they'd got into food as well, you know, and they were buying from a local farmer's market. So it's this seed that you plant, which says, look at the world in a different way. And they go down the recycling route, and they're on some website, and they get into transition towns in their area or something, and they meet someone who says, oh yeah, recycling, you know, here's the document on recycling, but what are you guys doing about food? And then they're like, what are we doing about food? Next thing you know, they're preaching to me about buying from the local farmers market and how it's organic and it's so good for you. And they've got this box scheme going that they're supporting 2 young farmers who, as you said, were using someone else's land. So renting a couple of fields from a big farmer, big commercial farmer, who's doing like, I don't know, 10,000 tons of rapeseed oil every year, and can't be bothered with a bit of market gardening, which is very labor intensive, but it's quite lucrative. But you need to be focused on it. So then what they do is they let 2 or 3 of their really good quality fields to a young couple who've got the energy to start there. Whereas an older farmer, and I mean, a lot of farmers in the UK are over the age of 65. So you don't want to be running around picking weeds out of a small, but there's these box schemes going, you know, and I always laugh at how friends of mine, when you just start the conversation, and then culture is very infectious.
It really is.
And I've been vegetarian for a long time, so I don't teach vegetarianism at all. I mean, I will never say to someone, you should be vegetarian, because it just doesn't work like that. But people say to me, how do you stay so fit and healthy? And I'm like, well, don't know, you know. And they see me tucking into chocolate and ice cream, which a lot of my friends can't really do because they just put on the weight. You know, if they're eating everything else they're eating, and they're eating lots of that. Not that I don't put on weight. I mean, that used to be true, but now I definitely do. But there was just a joke thing that came up. It's like, wow, man, you're vegetarian, but you eat so much chocolate. How does that work? And it's like, well, I'm not eating all that meat. It's lots of calories, you know. And I'm not selling that, and vegan friends who see this might be outraged that I'm using that as an argument for being vegan or whatever. But it's just, if you speak to people in a language that makes sense to them about something that's important to them, their children's nutrition and their health, that you're able to go and live with your family. I think they're your family, Cathy, but these people that you're staying with to take care of the children, you're a really trusted, intelligent person who's helping with their schooling. So they listen to you when you talk about the other things that interest you, and it's going to go in, you know, it's going to infiltrate.
Yes, but please, they're growing vegetables and I'm not, so we can't criticize them. They're doing better than I am in a whole pile of ways. I can't remember the example I made, but I didn't want that to run.
Yeah, but I think that's what that kind of comes back to what you said at the beginning, Cathy, about we all have value in a community.
Yeah, absolutely.
One person can do the food growing, you can help look after.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and that's
yeah.
such a great thing to pull all that together. Thanks, Wendy, for that. I'm just going to quickly go to David because I believe he has a question for us. So, David, if you would like to pop in and pose your question, I'd love to hear.
Well, this is absolutely fascinating listening to all of this. And something that got me thinking was the whole relationship between food, community, and mental health. And I think one of the things with mental health is alienation. And what you're talking about is bringing people together. And I was just wondering if you can think of any examples of maybe individuals with mental health issues or initiatives where people with mental health issues have been helped in terms of not only have they been engaged in a project that has to do with food, but also it's been beneficial to their mental health.
Good question. Yeah, thanks, David. Wendy, do you want to answer that?
So the permaculture community in the UK are quite strong on this, and actually they've got involved with NHS mental health services and got some groups. And Cathy, I'll dig them out and send them to you to add to your document. I know of two, and actually I was watching a video yesterday of one where young offenders can do community service by going to help on a community farm. And the farm is run on organic permaculture principles, and they get taught. So they don't do hard labor. I mean, they do dig a bit, but generally they're there to be learning about food, learning about nutrition, learning about organic farming. And the feedback from the interviews that they did with the young people that were there, I think one was saying he was only supposed to be there, I think 2 hours or 5 hours a week. He was there every day. They couldn't keep him away. He absolutely loved it. And he said it had so shifted how he felt about himself, his place in the community. He acknowledged specifically his mental health was just in a completely different space. And I think that was that may or may not have been a group who were young offenders, but there's also just work with people who are depressed. There's definitely an opportunity, and it's formal, it's available. I mean, I don't know, depending on your council and whether there is a community farm locally that offers it. But I know of quite a few initiatives where they're actually getting funding, and this may be a Brexit issue because I think a lot of it was EU-based funding, where the infrastructure, so for example, you know, lots of loos and a place for people to sit and eat and a changing room, something like that needs to be developed for lots of people to use the farm. But the additional support to have people out there, even if they're just digging a couple of weeds or doing a little bit of cutting or a bit of washing or whatever, particularly in market gardens where it's very hands-on, you know, you got a couple of rows of spinach and a couple of rows of lettuce, and they need a lot of hand-to-hand care. But you're standing there in the sun or the rain. I mean, here it's more sun, but there it's probably more rain. But you've got the robin coming down to see what you're up to, and that you're shifting the earth, and there's an earthworm potential there. And you've got this little chap that if you're a city-based folk, you've probably never been eyeball to eyeball with a robin. And there's a whole thing that happens when you go, wow, man, my food, the robin, the worm, the earth, you know, and something huge shifts. I know, because that's what happened for me. It absolutely is what happened for me.
Yeah, and that completely makes sense to me. And I mean, I've mainly worked with young people and mental health, and just something about getting outside and getting your hands in the soil is so good for mental health. So I'm really pleased to hear that there are projects that are actually engaging with that quite consciously as a modality for helping with mental health. Yeah, go for it, Cathy.
So local to you, Catherine, in Devon, do you know Huxham's Farm, the Apricot Centre at Huxham's Farm?
Yes. Yeah.
So that has a very strong programme with that intention. And another way of answering your question, David, is the link between, well, there's it is becoming increasingly accepted by the medical profession, the link between mental health and the gut. So that is a combination of the food that we put in and also the flora in our gut. And the flora in our gut is affected by us working on the land. So there are microbiomes, that might be the wrong word. Clearly, I am not an expert in this area. There's something that you connect with when you put your fingers in the soil that changes how your body can metabolize food, can digest food, and that affects your brain chemistry. So the processes in your gut also affect your brain chemistry, which is just stunning. So it's a winning spiral. Things get better and better and better if you start working on the land and growing vegetables. You eat more healthily, you become more happy and optimistic, and you spiral up and up.
Great.
And we see that the loss of all of that has had a spiral down. Just living off of mass-produced food, losing that connection with the production of food, losing being outside in nature, we've ended up with an incredibly depressed population.
Yeah. And I think educating our children is really important. I've mainly worked with young people, and I think, Wendy, something you said spoke to my experience of doing cooking with children, and that you know, they can make a pot noodle but didn't know what a really basic vegetable was, and I found that just horrifying. But they just shows it's not their fault. It's just they're just, you know, part of our culture, and that's where we are. And I know when I personally shifted to kind of what I would say real food, I really noticed when I went in the supermarket how much of a supermarket is real food and how much is processed food. It's probably like maybe a quarter, no, not even a quarter, is it? It's maybe 1/6, 1/7 of a supermarket is actually fresh produce. So the rest of it is what? Processed food.
I don't think it's even that much, a 20th maybe. Yeah,
maybe. Yeah, I think in the big supermarkets it's probably 1/20th. Yeah. I'm thinking of the smaller ones, but yeah, no, you're probably right. It's probably more like those figures. So I think inspiring our children is something I feel quite passionately about, because they are our next generation, and their their awareness of food and what food is on the whole quite poor. So I wonder how we can inspire our children to know different. So yeah, if there's any projects going on like that we can find out about, I might do a bit of digging on that. Oh, go on, Cathy, you've got a...
I watched a video that Wendy sent through from the Oxford Real Farming Conference, and this was what put me in touch with the National Food Strategy, because it was a panel of speakers, and one of the points raised there was a woman saying our food system in this country is actually now an apartheid system, because there's such a discrepancy between the people who can afford good food and the people who can't afford good food, and the people who are getting the information and the people who aren't. And I'm not sure that actually answered your point. I started off thinking it was relevant to what you just said. I'm not sure it was.
No,
sorry.
Okay, that's fine. So I was just talking about educating our young people. Was there anything that come in relation to that?
Sorry.
Yeah. No, that's fine. So I'm just thinking about someone who's living in an urban environment, who's really inspired by this conversation, thinks, yeah, this is an issue. I'm sure on some level many people are thinking about this, even if it's not that conscious, but maybe our conversation is making something a bit more conscious. So if we're speaking to someone who's in an urban environment, doesn't have a garden, no kind of growing spaces locally, from what you understand, where might be a good place to begin? Cathy?
Well, I would say there's no such thing as no growing spaces locally. Yeah, definitely. I would say that if you made a fuss to your council, they might lend you a flower bed. Like if you got together a few other people and made a fuss to the council, they would agree to some things, because everybody is really aware that this is a fundamental issue. So no such thing as no growing space. I think I've put a book in that document that says you can feed yourself off 3 square feet. I haven't read the book, so I'm surprised, but I think that's the title of the book. There are also a lot of efficient growing systems being developed. So even growing walls, so rather than needing land, being able to grow on the side of a building. that is an approach. And then if you can't grow yourself, somehow supporting a farm. So some of the community farm projects are box schemes. So you can either just be a customer that buys a regular delivery, or you can invest in some capacity either through your labour. Maybe you go one weekend a month and spend the weekend working on the land, or you sponsor something. So maybe you invest and make a regular contribution. There are a lot of different ways to get involved.
Thank you. Thanks, Cathy. It's great to have those next steps that we can speak to. Wendy, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything Cathy said, kind of points that I would have made myself as well. I know from my own experience living in an estate with land in London that obviously you have to take it slowly and be politically correct about it, you know, and talk to the right people. But we did get permission to convert some of the flower beds into allotment vegetable type gardens. They wanted the ones around the corner that no one could see. And the joke is that actually people get quite excited when they see vegetables growing. So yeah, I mean, that's again the culture training thing. You have to take it slowly. But there was an area that they had a lot of grass and they didn't want the dogs shitting there all the time. So they put a huge fence around this big piece of lawn that was just sitting there in the middle of London. And I was agog, you know, I was like, wow. So they allowed us to just put 2 small vegetable beds in there. And we got some council funding, and that needs to be a bit raised up so that people who were wheelchair users in the estate could then have that as a kind of a mental health thing. So there's all these angles that you can use to sell on why you want access to the space. That the council, the medical, mental health people, someone will buy into it. But alternatively, there are also transition town groups in London. And I'm familiar with London, but I think Bristol's also really, really big on this, where they've done things like road schemes and persuade people to actually put in raised beds somewhere on a road, where obviously not in the middle of the road, but outside metro stations. Some of the metro stations in London have got vegetable beds where people can pick. You know, obviously they lose quite a lot of their vegetables, but it's an education thing more than a feeding one family thing. It's kind of, look, you know, we just got this shitty little piece of ground where you get off the train every day that's normally full of cigarette stubs and chip packets. But now all of a sudden it's a whole bunch of spinach and basil or something. And maybe people take a couple of sprigs home, but people get that. And it's a great opportunity for people to go and grow vegetables. So I would say, ask your local council, because they will definitely know if people have done anything formal in the local area. And those groups are always looking for more support. And if they can't take more vegetable growers in their own little space that they've got, they might know who you can speak to get access to some space of your own. So that's definitely one thing. 100% back you on. Please support the farmers who are doing veg boxes. And some of them do chicken and milk and eggs and stuff like that as well. I think you can get quite a lot of your main groceries through a box scheme, and you're keeping a farmer going because you're buying it directly from them. So a lot of the times the pricing is not bad. You know, it's not super expensive, but that money's going directly in the farmer's pocket. And it makes a huge difference to how successful some of these new younger farmers will be, that people are supporting them directly, because the supermarkets really, really give them the minimum price that they can. But the other one I just wanted to mention is, you know, just to get that seed started, there's loads of ways that you can grow a tiny bit of food at home and just get a feeling for it. So even if you're in an apartment that's 20 stories up and you've got no chance, no balcony or anything like that, there's things that you can grow on the windowsill. You can hang, there's lots of stuff on Pinterest and on YouTube about changing a soda bottle, a cold drink bottle, plastic bottle, chopping it up and tying it together in a different way and putting a bit of soil in it, or growing just in water. And even things like the end of the celery, you can regrow the end of the celery, you know, just stick it in water and watch it for a while. It might go off and you might find a warmer windowsill and it will, you know, next time it'll grow. And the children get so much excitement out of that. Growing some beans under cotton wool on the windowsill, you know, it's a good thing. It might not be family fed, but it'll keep the kids excited.
Yeah, and it's just planting the seeds, but just getting people excited about growing. I agree. My experience of doing any growing with children or young people is they love it. They just love it. And it's just if you just plant a seed in a child of the experience of growing food, who knows what that could become. Another one I just thought of is Incredible Edibles, which I know they've got quite spaces in the Totnes area, where again, similar to what you've already described, it's like an area that wasn't being used for anything, and they've made it into edible foods. A lot of them are kind of herbs, I think, and stuff like that, but people can come along and educate themselves on different herbs and collect some of the herbs and things like that. So there are, yeah, guerrilla growing projects and things like that that are happening in different areas. So yeah, that's great. Yeah, go for it, Cathy.
Another point would be actually just to put a note through neighbours' doors. If you have no land but you walk past gardens that aren't being used, you could, I have done this in the past and been successful. Somebody's let me use their land. So offer a deal, just say, I'm really wanting to grow, and we could share the produce. People will say yes. So that's something you can do where you don't need any, you don't need the council involved, you don't need a website having a scheme in your area. That's something you can take the initiative over completely.
Yeah, great. I'm just having in my mind, I haven't had a huge amount of growing experience, but like some people, I've just kind of dabbled with it, and it is a journey. Sometimes you can plant things and it doesn't work, and the slugs get it, and you learn by trial and error a lot of the time. But I was very lucky to live in a community in Dorset for a year where I was responsible for a polytunnel. Love polytunnels. I really would love to have another polytunnel, because growing in a polytunnel was really different to growing outside. It feels like a polytunnel really supports growing in a much more abundant way. And I remember my sort of most loved experience of growing was I met this lovely farmer lady who gave me 10 seeds, these cucumber seeds, and she put them in my hand and she told me 3 things to do with them, which I cannot remember right now, but I know one of them was keeping them out of draft. And she told me these 3 rules. She said, follow these 3 rules and you'll have an abundance of cucumbers, like hundreds and hundreds. And I remember looking at these tiny seeds going, I can't imagine how these tiny little seeds are going to do that. But absolutely, that is what happened. We, had a community of sometimes up to 30 people living there. We had non-stop cucumbers for 6 months. And it was just, and there's something about the experience of that, of nurturing these 10 tiny seeds into that, and seeing the abundance of nature and how generous nature, there's something about doing that I think is really, it changed my life in a really amazing way, to see nature in action in that way. So I think anywhere where people can have some experience of that, or we can definitely involve our children in some experience of that, I think it inspires something for the future, for sure. Wendy.
That just brings to mind another type of project which Cathy probably ran into with the national food strategies, where they're talking about collecting the abundance where there are already fruit and nut trees, particularly. I mean, not so much vegetables, maybe herbs, but trees that once they get settled, they're so productive. So near the place that I was living in London, there is a little tiny nature reserve, and they have quite a lot of apple trees there, and they make community cider.
Right.
And actually they put the word out, so other people around there who have a tiny piece of land, and I mean, people generally try and keep apple trees alive, even if it's, a tiny little garden just with the one tree, but it'll probably produce more apples once it's settled than that family can eat, and then the extra apples go to someone who makes cider, and the whole community gets together with the kids. They've got a big cider press, and they press the apples, a big community project, and then people drink the cider, which is really good. So different ways of collecting food.
Yeah, great. So we're nearing the end of our conversation already. Again, it's gone so quickly. I always take that as a good sign when it's gone quickly, and it feels like it's been really rich. I definitely feel inspired to go and do more, which is great, and I hope that people that are listening are. I just wonder if we could collect together what we feel is important things to think about, because there's a lot. I definitely want to share this document as far and wide as we can. And if anyone is having trouble accessing that document, you're very welcome to email me at communityresilience.livetalks@gmail.com, and I will endeavour to send it to you, because it feels really important to get that. So if wherever you're watching or listening to this, if you're struggling to find that, do email me and I will try and send it to you directly, because it feels like a really useful document to have. So what if we were sort of to collect up, what are the key things to think about now? What would you say to that? Cathy?
I think it's it's appreciating that you have agency, not being a victim of a system, but saying the system has broken, let's create something new, and that I myself am going to be part of creating something with vision and something that honors humanity, something that's bloody fabulous. You know, we don't have to create a shit system. We can create something really great now. We have the absolutely right, perfect conditions to do that. So let's get on with it.
Yeah, great. That's great. Wendy?
I would say start small. You know, we don't all have to start a 15-acre or hectare vegetable farm tomorrow. That's just very few of us are going to have that role. But even just thinking about food and about where it comes from in your local area, and helping with a Facebook group or something like that, as Cathy was saying, everyone has different skills. But the other thing that very much comes to mind with what Cathy is reminding us about is, I certainly wasn't there, but I have read quite a lot about it. During the war, there were real food shortages, major issues with food shortages. And the government just turned completely in terms of their strategy, and every available piece of land, even that wasn't really available, they made it available. So the parks in London, for example, were ploughed up and people planted vegetables everywhere. And a lot of people must have gone hungry, but certainly not that many people starved, because the food was actually produced. And you know, you can grow peas in a couple of weeks. You know, potatoes might take a bit longer, and rice is not really possible in the UK, but there's loads of food that can be grown really quickly. So it's just a case of shifting the attitude. There's no reason why there should be a food shortage in the UK of fresh, well-grown food.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I feel like I would love to see happen right now. There is so much land in Devon that is just sitting there not being used. And I feel like if we had the opportunity to be, as a community, you know, as communities, to be given access to that land to get growing, that's what I would love to see happen right now. So if there's anyone in Devon who's listening to this that feels like they want to do that, I'm happy to talk to you. Contact me. So I'd love to have the conversation, and in other areas as well. So yeah, thanks ladies, really great conversation. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your wisdom on this topic, and Cathy again for doing the work on that document. I believe it's a document that we can add to. Is that right? So we can add to it?
No, I've set the settings. It's on it's a Google document, so it's read only, so people can view it but not edit it.
We can add to it still?
I can add to it, yeah,
okay,
indeed.
Right.
And
So,
address there or something, Cathy, so people can send suggestions and comments to you.
Very good idea. Haven't done that. We'll add that.
Yeah, great. So yeah, so if anyone's watching this and they have ideas about different things to add in, and outside of the UK as well, if there's anyone listening in the US, listening to these in the US, who know some great things are happening over there, send it to us either on the comments or by my email, communityresiliencelifetalks@gmail.com. We'll try and add it onto the document and make it as a widely used document as we can. So thank you so much.
Pleasure.
It's been really great. I'm really pleased to have this conversation. I was saying to David before we began, I think of all the conversations we've had so far, this one I felt a bit nervous about, because I'm aware this is it's a conversation that not a lot of people want to engage in, because it's scary, you know. This is such an important thing, our food supply, and I feel like I'm finishing the conversation full of resourcefulness is the feeling, and like, yes, okay, we can be empowered to do something with this, and I'm other people feel the same. So thank you. So just to mention, we're having a break next week. We're having a week off, so we'll be resuming the calls on Tuesday the 2nd of March. The next conversation is going to be on faith, and we've got 3 different people from very different perspectives talking on the topic of faith, and how faith doesn't have to be religious faith, but just faith in general is helping to build and develop community resilience. And just to say, you can find us on Facebook, Community Resilience Live Talks. It's the same on YouTube, and we are doing our live podcasts. The live podcasts are now going on to Spotify, Apple Music, Google Podcasts, and many more, all under the name of Community Resilience Live Talks. David, you wanted to add something before we finish?
Yes, if we're having a week off, then the next one is Tuesday, the 9th of March.
Oh, yes, thank you. You're right. You're right. Thank you very much for saying that. So yes, we would have been on the 2nd of March, but we're having a week off. So yes, thanks for that. So the next one will be back on Tuesday, the 9th of March. That's it. Thank you so much. And wishing you all well with your ongoing projects of everything you're doing. Thanks for your heart and your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you for putting this all together, Catherine. Thank you for making it possible.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Wish
your
you
hard
well.
work, Cathy.
Yeah, thanks,
And nice
ladies.
to meet you, Cathy.
Thanks,
David.
Real pleasure. Thank you.
Okay.